delighted to be able to introduce Ian Marchant to you, our speaker for tonight. He's an alumni of this university and a great supporter of us. So I was down at an alumni event with him last week in London. So he was there flying the flag for Durham, and he's up here again this week, yet again helping us out. So we're very grateful that he spends his time, or gives us as much of his time as he does do. So a bit of background on Ian. Up until summer 2013, Ian was Chief Executive of Scottish and Southern Electric, so one of the big six, as we all know. And he stood down then, but his current roles, so he's currently Chairman of the Wood Group, Non-Executive Chairman of Nova Innovation, Executive Director of the Aggreko PLC and Linknode, as well as Chairman of Maggie's Cancer Charity. He's also on the advisory board of the Centre of Energy Policy at Strathclyde University, so he has links with Strathclyde and Edinburgh universities at least, as well as Durham, and is a member of the Prince's Council of the Duchy of Cornwall. He also, up until summer 2015, he was the chairman of Scotland's 2020 Climate Delivery Group, former president of the Energy Institute, and former chairman of Infinis Energy PLC, which I think we stepped down from in December 2015. He said that he would correct me if I got any of those wrong, so hopefully I didn't, but you'll find out in a moment. So Ian's going to talk to us tonight about are we at an energy tipping point? So I'll hand over to him now, and
Okay, thank you, Simon. Only one mistake. Scottish is on energy, not Scotland's on electricity, but
only got the big one.
Yeah, only got the big one. Yeah. So thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will stand up, and if my leg plays up, I might end up sitting back there again. Yes, so I'm going to talk about are we at an energy tipping point now. The fact that you're all here means you know how important energy is. If you think I think for the last 300 years, energy has been the biggest single contributor to human development. But it's also been the biggest single contributor to man-made climate change. It's a fascinating industry, but because it acts in the sort of the juncture between markets and politics. It involves every one of us, every individual in this country, but it's organised around some of the biggest businesses on the planet. And it's an instantaneous industry, serving needs now, but we have to think about long term. Now, the conclusions of the Paris Summit in December last year point to a zero carbon energy system by 2050. That got me thinking. 2050 is 34 years away, and that seems like a long time. But then I think back 34 years, and 34 years ago, I was a fresh-faced, but still overweight undergraduate. That's actually me graduating in 1983, but you sort of get the point. Now, I spent most of my time frequenting the Dun Cow on Old Elvet, rather than the library. For those of you who don't know, at that point the library was on Palace Green, and the economics department was on Old Elvet. But actually, when I think back, it doesn't feel like a long time ago, but an incredible amount has changed. When I was at university, this was my mobile phone, a 10p piece. Because actually, the first mobile phone wasn't sold in the UK until 1985. That phone cost over £1,000. It weighed about 5 kilograms, and some of you may find this surprising, it was just a phone. Now, my smartphone here costs around a third of that, weighs less than 1/50th of its old ancestor, and it's so much more, as you know, than just a phone. It's my access point to the whole world of information. It's my camera, my diary, my calculator, and I can even control the heating on my home in Edinburgh on this. More of that later. Now, when I was studying here, the best mobile music that I could find was the Sony Walkman. Some of you, the younger people in the room, won't even know what I'm talking about. The Sony Walkman is basically a cassette player, and that's what I took on my interrail trip around Europe. But I had to choose just 6 cassettes, which meant I had about 80 songs to last me those 28 days. Now, my current iPod Mini which is less than a quarter of the size of that Walkman, has over 4,000 songs, a 50-fold increase. And again, it may startle you to know, but back in 1982, students did not have their own computers. The first PC was only sold in 1981. So in 1982, they're clearly still a luxury item. The university had a mainframe, and yes, if you did the right course, which of course I didn't, you got to program it with a stack of cards. And if you dropped the cards, you were back to square one because you had to put them in the right order. The first email service wasn't launched in the UK until 1988, so we had to write actual letters. If I think about my iPad here, that I've got my notes on, it's faster and more powerful than the 1980s Cray supercomputer. And that would have cost in today's money around 20 million. That Cray supercomputer was deaf, blind, dumb and immobile. My iPad, as well as being that very powerful computer, has a speaker, a microphone, 2 cameras, you can use wireless and Wi-Fi, it can connect to the whole world, it has a GPS device, a digital compass, an accelerometer, a gyroscope, and a high-definition touchscreen. I've got 141 applications, 50 books, over 100 articles, 10,590 photos, 3,195 songs, 20 videos, and about 20,000 emails. And it's only just over half full. Now, I'm not saying all that because I'm a grumpy old man. I am, but that's not why I'm saying it. And I'm also not saying it because I'm nostalgic for my time in Durham, which again, I am, but that's not why I'm saying it. What I've just tried to illustrate is how much change can happen in effectively one working lifetime. And I've used my working lifetime. Those of you in the room of a similar age to me will understand those stories. Those of you who are a lot younger will struggle, but trust me, an awful lot changes in a period of 30 odd years. And that's my first prediction, that an awful lot will change in the next 30 years. So it's time to start getting out my crystal ball and make some predictions. But you're pleased to know I'm going to stick to the things that I do know. I'm not going to talk about hoverboards or flying cars. I'm going to stick to the industry that I know, the energy industry. It's rarely out as the news. There always appears to be things happening. Yesterday it was N-Power cutting jobs. However, in the 20 plus years that I've been in the industry, actually progress and the pace of change has generally been pretty slow. There have been bursts of activity and then long periods of stasis. There's been more change about regulation and ownership of assets than actually about the fundamental nature of the industry. However, I believe that's changing. When I now look back over those 30 years, I realise that the IT and communications industry was at a tipping point in the 1980s. Lots of things were coming together that meant the pace of change was just about to accelerate. And I think the same is happening in the energy industry now, and we're in that decade now. And that belief forms the basis, in a sense, of the predictions that I'm going to make, because I think there are 7 themes that play out in that. Now, the first one, 30 years ago, and indeed until pretty recently, our electricity was produced by about 100 large plants, each of them consisted of a few really big units. They were connected by a string of large pylons. We lived in a big iron age. Now there are already around 1 million small generators, ranging from community-owned wind turbines, to small-scale biomass plants, to rooftop wind, rooftop solar and ground-mounted solar. And there are a decreasing number of older, larger power stations. That trend is going to continue, because I think any developer of a home, a factory or an office will be looking at whether they should include on-site generation now, and within the next 5 years will be including on-site generation. So in 30 years' time, we will have millions and millions of small power stations in this country. That's my first prediction. Now, one consequence of that very large industrial scale of our power industry was it was very centralised. If you've ever if you come up on the train from London, you cross over Megawatt Valley in Yorkshire, where you can see just from the station, from the train line, at least 3 large coal-fired power stations. And control of the industry was concentrated initially in 3, but now 1 control room full of smart engineers. The national grid was actively managed, but the local networks were pretty passive. Now I think that's going to fundamentally change. We're going to go from, if you like, an analog mode to a digital mode. And the networks of 30 years' time will be multi-directional, self-healing, fully distributed. And those smart engineers will be replaced by a smart network. The industrial era of electricity that I've talked about was successfully built with carbon. Initially coal, then gas. But again, that is changing. We're unlikely to see any new coal-fired power stations built here. And the pace of new gas-fired stations is slow to a trickle. Renewables have filled the gap, supplying around 25% of our electricity last year. And the biggest shift in the last few years has been the rise of solar. Capacity is already over 8 gigawatts solar. To give you a perspective, that's twice the size of the largest industrial power station, Drax. And there are trends in solar panel prices and advances in technology. Things like thin film solar means that we're heading into the silicon age. Just like the communications industry left copper behind, we're going to leave carbon behind. Energy policy, investment and technology has been focused on the supply side, the production. However, disruptive change is really happening at the demand. You've got real trends in home automation, energy management, active demand. And they're all, and I've been amazed at the number of business startups that are going on in this side of the industry. More and more customers, be they large property owning landlords or owner occupiers, are looking to engage with their energy and actively manage it. When customers take charge of an industry, revolution happens. So we're going to move from the big centralized control room to that app that's on my smartphone that allows me to control my heating at home. I'm not going to demonstrate it because I get complaints when I demonstrate it. Next thing, I said earlier that the energy industry has been the biggest contributor to man-made climate change. That's because carbon emissions were ignored until 2 decades ago. When I was here, we did not think about carbon emissions. They were completely unpriced until about 10 years ago, and even now the price of carbon doesn't reflect the true cost to us and future generations of those emissions. However, as a society, as an economy, as an industry, we're gradually waking up to the threat of climate. And the events in Paris, I think, were net optimistic. And therefore the trend towards clean energy is, I think, irreversible. As an example, I came across a report the other week from Bernstein, one of the city research firms, and they've run some modelling out to 2035, and they predicted that in 2035, 88% of the UK's electricity would be from clean sources, combination of nuclear and renewables. If you're a fan of carbon intensity of generation, which I happen to be, the typical carbon intensity of generation is around 450 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Their report predicted it to be about 45 in 2035. That shift from dirty energy to clean energy is a major theme, and the investment community can see that. Theme 6, we move from production to storage. The way we managed our electricity system in the 20th century, and indeed largely still do, is the way we managed to meet variable demand, i.e. responding when you switch on and off your light, is somewhere there's a thermal power station in something doing spinning reserve or fast response. So it's really odd, because we're using energy in case we need to supply energy, which is odd when you think about it, and inefficient. It also leads to the bizarre situation where you've got free marginal cost of energy being left idle when demand is low. However, I think that's changing, because one of the biggest areas of energy research globally is in storage. Partly driven by electric vehicles, which I'll come on to in a minute, but also you've heard about the Tesla wall. There are companies over here doing the same thing. And I think the level of electricity storage in the UK will mushroom, so that the 3 hollow mountains that we currently have will only be a small part of the total storage on the system. My last theme is, I think we're going to see a switch from petrol to electric. Now, the internal combustion engine has absolutely revolutionised personal transport, and petrol and diesel have dominated that for the last 100 or so years. However, we're seeing more and more car manufacturers selling electric or plug-in hybrids. I now drive the BMW i3, which is the car you can see here. That's not actually my car, you can tell by the number plate, but anyway, I drive one of those around town. Now, when you drive one of those, you'll see what I mean. I think the first shift, which will happen very quickly, is we will move to all electric drivetrains. And you're already starting to see that. And all electric is the electric motor drives the wheels. That's fast, believe me. It's quiet and it's clean. Initially, those electric motors will be charged partly by battery and partly by petrol engines. That's what I have in my i3. I can do 70 miles purely on battery, and I can do about 70 miles effectively on petrol, running a small engine that charges the battery. But in the next 10 years, battery technology is going to change, so I think in 10 years' time, most of us will be driving all electric cars. If you haven't driven an electric car, do. It's fun. So I believe that we're at the tipping point. All those themes that I've been mentioning have been emerging in those last 32 years, 34 years, can't do my maths. They've been there. These are not new. But what I am seeing is that they're all picking up pace. And they're all picking up pace this decade. And that the energy world in 2050 will look completely different than the energy world did in 1982. And it has to be, because if we are in the same energy world in 2050 as we were in 1982, we have cooked the planet irreversibly. So we have to change, and the signs are we are changing. However, as you can see, I've drawn on here a very nice smooth graph. Tipping points are never smooth. And at times it feels like we're going backwards. It is certainly extremely bumpy. So I'm going to offer 4 solutions that I think will see us through this bumpy transition phase into the point where we can start seeing really accelerated momentum. and therefore personal reflections, if you like, on what I think we need to do and what the industry needs to do. The first is engagement. Now, in my 25 plus years in the industry, attitude of society has changed. When I first told my friends from university that I was going to join the electricity industry, there was a look of complete bewilderment at why I would choose to join a boring, old-fashioned, fuddy-duddy industry. And actually, that has completely not been my experience at all. But for the first 10 or 12 years that I was in the industry, the reputation was well deserved, and the conversations in the pub did not change. In fact, there were no conversations in the pub about what I did. But in the last 10 years, that's fundamentally changed. We want to know. Getting a cab to King's Cross station this morning, the taxi driver asks me where I'm going. He then asks me what I'm doing there. He then asks me what I'm going to talk about. And he wants to talk there when he hears it's a lecture about energy. He wants to talk about renewables and nuclear and how good the state of the industry is. That did not happen 10 years ago. I know taxi drivers can talk on any subject. Believe me, I've had more conversations in the back of a cab about the industry in the last 5 years than I have in the previous 20. So people have got much more interested, but there's a problem. The industry struggled to engage in those debates in a meaningful way. Now, I've got a few theories about why that might be. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a marketeer, but I've got some theories. First is, our industry is effectively an essential commodity. So, since Thomas Edison's days, we haven't really been involved in marketing. We don't think of our product like the makers of shampoo, baked beans or summer holidays. So we don't engage in a marketing, and we have never done. The second thing is that our industry is dominated by engineers and accountants. Guilty of the second, not the first. And we talk for hours to fellow engineers and accountants, but we're not good at talking about our industry to others. Maybe it's because we've all got different views on what we think the right answer is. So actually most of the time the industry is shouting at each other. Renewables are shouting at nuclear, and then we're both going up on coal. So all the society hears is a cacophony of voices. And then finally I wonder whether the reason we don't get engagement is that our industry is complicated and long term. It doesn't fit well in the soundbite 24-hour cycle of news. Now, I haven't got the answers to those questions, but I really do think that the industry has to engage with more people more often. And this is part of that. And the Energy Institute is part of doing that. So my second solution is policy. Now, you probably have heard of the so-called trilemma. And the so-called trilemma is, on this side here, sustainability, security of supply and affordability. You've probably heard of that. That's the shorthand that we all use to describe the tensions of energy policy. But I don't think it gets to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is the difference between supply and demand. So I have modestly come up with a second trilemma to try and talk about supply. And let me just illustrate the difference between the two sides. Imagine your personal decision about replacing your gas boiler, and imagine your corporate decision about replacing your gas-fired power station. The first is a few £100, the second is a few $100 million. The first is in response to an immediate need. You are cold now. The second involves a complex analysis of where the UK may be in 3 to 4 years' time. The first involves you and your plumber. The second involves hundreds of different people in tens of organisations. The only policy that really influences your decision on the gas boiler is what models are available. In the second, trust me, you spend your entire life worrying about policy, otherwise you don't invest. So the supply side sucks in the life of the debate on policy. So I've come up with a demand side trilemma: flexibility, meeting of needs, and affordability. Yeah, it's the same point. But let me explain that. First, flexibility. Actually, our current system is pretty flexible. When you switch the light on, it's there. Switch it off, it's off. But it's quite odd, because you have no idea the cost of that action. You're charged the same regardless of the time of day or the time of year. That's a really odd situation to be in. And we want that flexibility. In fact, we want more flexibility, we want more control. We want to be able to turn on the heating and the lights remotely. So I want control. But the industry also wants flexibility and control. But it also has two different purposes. The network operator, firstly, the guy who runs the wires in your street. A little thought experiment for you. If every car in your street was a plug-in hybrid electric car, what do you think would happen if they all plugged in at the same time? I'll tell you, the lights will go out in your street because the fuses in the substation will blow. So the network operator wants to know what's happening in real time. Some of you will have heard about smart grids. That's what it's all about. The network operator understanding what is happening and then being able to either stop it or influence it. So that's the network side. But the other side, the supply side, the generation retail, they have a different objective. They want you to use power when it's cheapest. So they want you to run your dishwasher when it's windy. They want you to charge your car when it's sunny. And frankly, if it's a still, clear night, they'd rather you sat in the dark. But they actually want you to bear the costs of that, because that allows them to take cost out of the industry. So what you can see from those three descriptions is these three sorts of flexibility all pull in different directions. The network wants you to delay charging your electric car. The generation business wants you to charge it right now. And you want to know, what are the costs of those different choices? And then I want to make my own decision, please. So policy has to get to the heart of what flexibility and control means. So then the second point, meeting of needs. I don't know about you, but I don't actually know what a kilowatt hour or a therm of gas is. Now I know the scientists in the room will tell me about heating water in a kettle is a certain pressure is a definition. Well, I don't want a kilowatt hour. I want light. I want to charge my phone. That's what I want. But the trouble is, I don't know what I'm paying for. You just get an estimated bill every 3-4 months. You've no idea when you incurred that, if it's right, and you don't know what you're spending your money on. Therefore, what we do as a society is we overspend to make sure that our needs are met. Again, simple question. Think about the time clock on your central heating unit at home. I wonder how often your central heating will be on at home when there's nobody in. Some of you probably have that as we speak. That's an example where we are, because we don't think about this, we don't know. You've got no idea how much it costs to heat your home for one night. So we overspend, we overconsume to make sure that our needs are met. Demand side policy needs to put the meeting of needs at the front, not consumption. Now the third leg of my demand trilemma is down here, affordability. But it's a different affordability. The affordability on the supply side really focuses on the unit cost of energy. Affordability on the demand side focuses on unit consumption. One times the other gives you a bill. Now that's often taken as energy efficiency, but it's only part of the story, because energy efficiency can just mean that we waste more energy efficiently. An example is if you have a really fuel efficient car, but you drive when you should be using video conference. So we need to think about all of the aspects of energy efficiency. We need to think about it creatively. We need to think about the difference between the owner-occupied and the rental sector, between new build and existing. We need as much creativity there. We also need to look, I think, at the affordability across all three bills together. If I switch to an electric car, my power bill goes up. And actually, according to the government metrics on this, I am more likely to be in fuel poverty, even though my fuel bill has gone to zero. Typical customer in the UK will spend about £400 a year on electricity, £600 on gas, assuming they heat their home with gas, and about £1,000 on petrol or diesel in their car. Well, let's start thinking of the energy bill as a £2,000 bill and work out what the right way to solve it is, because that's actually what is or is not affordable. So these two things need to sit alongside each other. On the supply side, engineers and politicians love big binary solutions. Let's build something big. Now, you could be thinking, let's build a big nuclear station, let's build a big offshore wind farm, let's build a big CCS plant. That actually doesn't matter. You think big if that. The demand side thinks small, thinks distributed. And if you think about my example of the technology industry in the 80s, that industry has gone from big to small. Big, centralized mainframe computers that only universities could afford, to a powerful supercomputer in your pocket. And that has unleashed creativity, it's unleashed businesses, and it's unleashed us as people. That same democratization of energy needs to happen. And then my third solution is technology itself. You've heard of Moore's law, which is the power of semiconductors doubling every 2 years. That's held true for over 50 years, and it has, as I explained earlier, revolutionized many aspects of our life, but not the energy industry. We're still pretty analog. You can go into power stations today and see stuff being used that was installed in the 60s. You dig up your street and those pipes and wires were probably put in the 20s. So what's going on in technology? Well, you've got reductions in cost of communication, data storage and sensors, and data analytics means we're on the verge of the Internet of Things. If you think at the moment in this country we have millions of connected devices. The Internet of Things means there'll be billions and billions of connected devices. That's going to happen. But what it will mean in the energy industry is less clear, but things like your fridge will be able to talk to the local substation, and it will cycle itself based upon what the substation is seeing, because they'll both have sensors, and you won't even know it's happening, and you won't care, because your fridge currently cycles on its own mind, but the Internet of Things will allow it to do it as part of the system. Then we've had advances in computing power so that augmented reality is a real reality. I've stood at the top of a Saudi Aramco drilling rig in the desert that is Salford. And it is quite unnerving when you've got the goggles and you really feel you're there. That revolutionises training. But actually also if you put wearable technology, glasses, wearable overalls, you can put information in the right place at the right time for the right person. Simple thing like gas detectors on cuffs of boiler suits. All of that sort of technology is coming. I also think machine learning will effectively run our electricity system, because machines are quite capable of doing scheduling and dispatch in our power network. We don't need people doing it. Then you've got advances in 3D printing, nanotechnology, material sciences. That's changing what we're building, how we're building it. So imagine a world where the boiler repairman that arrives at your door before you knew that the boiler wasn't working because the Internet of Things has sent the sensor, and he's got his Google glasses on, he looks at it, and he can talk back to the head office saying, well, we know what part it is, we have sent the instructions to the 3D printer in your van, that part is printing off. That's the sort of world that the energy industry is heading in, maybe. But I'll make two specific predictions of where I really do believe that technology is going to disrupt the industry. The first is, I've mentioned it before, storage. We are seeing significant money and innovation in the field of batteries and battery control and battery management, and that will affect every aspect of the energy industry: retail, supply, networks. We'll see these storage devices at the home, at the substation, on the national grid, and at the generator. You can today buy a storage device that goes in your home, smaller than your boiler, probably 2 to 3 kilowatt hour storage. I think more and more homes will have that. The second trend is, again, I've mentioned it, home automation. It's amazing what you can do on your smartphone. So why can't you control your home? You will. I really do believe in the next 15 to 20 years, no, actually the next 5 to 10 years, that will happen. That will change the industry. Because if you've got control of your energy, it won't be on the established patterns. To give you what I'm trying to get across here is the exponential change point. I outlined all of that change that's happened since I left Durham. I think that's a phenomenal amount of change. Exponential change means that we will see the same again in the next 2 years. And it will last for a while longer. What that means for the energy industry, we need to embrace technology and exploit it before it makes our decisions redundant. I am nearing the end, because I've always believed that the key to long-term success isn't having the right answers, but it's actually knowing what the right questions are. And I've posed some of the questions tonight. And then it's about developing options, because the world is uncertain and more complex than we know and more complex than we can understand. So I think it's about developing options. So I'm just going to rattle off my 10 options that I would be pursuing if I was the Secretary of State for Energy. I'd be making sure we're investing in storage at all levels of the electricity system, from the house right up to the grid. I would elevate the demand side of policy to an equal footing with supply. I would be actively promoting home automation and control so it becomes the norm. I would ensure that all new buildings and homes have some form of on-site renewable generation. I would be trialling CCS on gas generation. I would be investing in research and development on small-scale modular nuclear reactors, brackets, but I wouldn't be building a big one. I would be promoting electric vehicles. I would be integrating transport and energy planning and policy. I would maximise the exploitation of the cheapest form of renewables, and I would rebuild trust and engagement between firms and customers in the energy industry. So there's my 10. But actually, I would encourage you, as people in the industry, people interested in the industry, what are your options? that you think we should be doing. There isn't a definitive and right answer to the list of options. The key to success, I think, is to develop options. So as you know, the future is impossible to predict. This is a variant of a well-known quote. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Well, we're not inventors here, I suspect, but I believe it's possible to see some big shifts that are coming. Looking back over the last 30 years, we can see that the 1980s was the tipping point in technology, and I believe the same is happening in electricity. I see big shifts, big to small, centralized to distributed, carbon to silicon, supply to demand, dirty to clean, production to storage, petrol to electric. Now the best way to predict how they're going to play out is to help shape it. And the way we're going to help shape it is first of all by getting engaged. You're here, you're starting to engage, but think about how we engage others in the debate. I think we have to reform policy, we have to put demand on a level playing field with supply. We as an industry have to exploit technology before it eradicates us, and we have to develop options. Energy is changing and the industry has to embrace that change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. I think we have time for some questions.
Have I stunned you all into silence?
So Lynn's going to come around with a microphone. If you don't mind, if you just state your name and who you are.
Just give me a clue as to the background of why you're asking the question, if you see what I mean.
What do I
Your name and...
My name's Ariel, I'm actually one of Simon's ex-students from a couple of years ago.
We have sympathy for you.
It was just regarding the options you said that you would give to the Secretary of Energy. And when you talked about that sort of carbon silicon revolution, like 30 years ago we had resources which were sitting on mines of coal and we had all this gas and stuff, so it kind of helped to accelerate that tipping point, as you said. A lot of the resources which I think you need to fuel this new tipping point come from foreign places like China and America. So do you think the tipping point is as easy to achieve as it was 30 years ago, based on this and geopolitical relations and all that jazz that comes with it, really?
Have any of you been to Epcot and seen Ellen's Energy Adventure? It's corny, but it ends with the last call, what's the ultimate renewable device? And it's renewable energy, it's actually human ingenuity. So we've solved bigger problems before. And if we apply the best people and the best mindset, we can solve the energy, the climate change challenge. Yeah, the UK has, actually, because I live in Scotland, it's even more true in Scotland. We've rolled the jackpot. We had coal, so we exploited it like crazy for 200 years. And just as that's running out, we find oil. But we've hit the third jackpot. We live in one of the windiest places on Earth, and we have very strong marine energy. So there is okay, we don't do so well on the sun, but we do well on other renewable resources. So I think that there is scope for doing this, because we've done it before. There needs to be a political will, and I fortunately fear there needs to be a crisis. We're close to a crisis in our electricity system, but I think before, you almost need to think about war footing. It's interesting that you see rather than using the war analogy, the analogy that is being used is the Apollo moon landing, Project Apollo, and because that has a positive aspiration. How a whole nation got behind a goal and achieved it within 10 years. And just on that, I'm just going to say something to a few people in the room. when man landed on the moon in 1969, the average age of the mission controllers in Houston that supervised that was 26. So when Kennedy gave that call in 1962, they were 19. So it was your age people who solved the problem, not my age people. So that's an aside, nothing to do with your question in the sense. But I'm pointing at them. I've tagged you as being more older than 19. So,
correct. Okay.
Hi, I'm Andy Clark. I'm a member of the Energy Institute. I'm a member of the Institution of Gas Engineers and Managers, you know where I started, and a fellow of the Energy Managers Association. And I want to suggest rephrasing one of your options slightly to bringing the current building stock up to an energy efficiency level above that of the current building regulations.
It's interesting because as I was answering the first question, thinking actually one of the biggest challenges is our built environment. If you think about how quickly stuff turns over, your smartphone, you buy a new model every 2 to 3 years. Your car, 4 to 7 years. And you buy new models. Your house, you might move every 7 to 10 years, but it's 50 to 100 year turnover. So it does mean that our built environment on average is probably about 60, 70 years old. And it's crap from an energy point of view. And actually, if you really wanted, where do you start on Project Apollo? That's actually where I would start in the built environment. Along with, and storage and home automation is part of that. The other advantage of starting with home automation, it employs people locally. So I think I completely agree. We've got to, over the next 30 odd years, significantly raise the standard of our built environment. Because it's actually a national disgrace.
I think it's an international disgrace.
Well, it's a national disgrace because it's so poor internationally, is what I meant.
Thanks. It's David Still. It says I've got 30 years of beards and sandals behind me.
And you and I have known each other for almost that length of time as well.
It feels like it's a
Yes.
beauty that needs to happen.
Yes.
Maybe. You have an energy policy run by the assistant to somebody who wants to run the country on behalf of maybe Chinese and French investment. To get past this tipping point, should we have blackouts?
Yes. Well, I don't think we need to be quite as extreme as blackouts. I did say we need a crisis, and I think that crisis will be squeaky bum time on the electricity network, night after night. So your lights won't go out, but the prices will be so high that industry will be self-disconnecting, and that will force what I hope we have is an apolitical, long-term, rational debate about energy. And in a sense, I feel my role is as one of the Old Testament prophets of, and I wish my hair was longer because it would suit that, of just saying, you know, the road we're heading on is the road to destruction. So that when it happens, people at least realise that people were saying it. But I do feel we'll need a crisis to change our behaviours. Some questions for a couple of people, one in front and one behind.
Hi, Ed Walker. I work for NARC Distributed Energy.
Yeah.
I'm live, also involved with the Energy Institute, that's why I'm here tonight. So my question sort of follows on from that last one relating to policy. So several of the solutions that you projected at the end of your talk, I think there's already the resource and willingness and interest in pursuing them, but recent changes to policy have meant that that can't happen. So for instance, scrapping of CCS, changes to low carbon buildings, which again have implications for the regs, big collapse of of solar PV for domestic installations, things like that. So I guess my question is, how do you see us going forward with energy security when there's a lack of rationality from central government in terms of energy policy? It's just so disruptive.
Tonight's talk was one of the most upbeat I ever given. My normal party people are pretty pessimistic. And I am very pessimistic short term for the reasons that effectively David was saying. Our energy policy is being driven by complete short-term political opportunism by the Treasury and by people who don't actually understand basic physics, let alone energy. And that makes me short-term very pessimistic. And you've outlined some of those changes. I actually think the abandonment of the CCS competition was vandalism of the highest order. The closing of the RO early was completely unnecessary. It's going to save people 6p a year. So I'm short-term very pessimistic, but I am long-term optimistic because I think the drive towards clean energy that comes out of Paris is an international drive, and at some point a crisis will force the UK onto the right road. I sort of suppose I have to be optimistic, because otherwise what's the point? But actually one of the things that people like me can do is continue to bang that gong and say that. And I was in the House of Commons yesterday talking about the demand trilemma, trying to and you're right, there's a vast array of people interested in making a positive difference, including some of the civil servants at DEC, just not at the top.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, yeah.
My name's Stuart Dolby. I'm a master's student in chemistry. And so you said about an international drive. Do you think James Hansen had anything right when he said before the Paris conference that the sort of Western democracies didn't around for too long, and basically we're going to have to wait for the Chinese and Indian governments to have generally more engineers and scientists to come along and take a slightly more pragmatic solution, or do you think he wasn't quite on board with that one?
One of my other talks I give is talk about some of the mega trends, and one of the mega trends that I think is true is I think the balance of power shifted between West and East, and actually the real point of that transfer was the 14th of September 2008, which is the day that Lehman Brothers went bust. And that was effectively, it marked the end of the S-curve of the West dominance of the way. So I think Hansen has a good point, that the solutions to a decarbonised future may well come from east of here. That doesn't mean necessarily China. I think China's, because of air pollution, is responding fast. But there's a lot of vibrant stuff going on around the whole of the Pacific Rim, up into India, and it's really interesting to see the noises that are coming out of the Middle East. I think it was the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who said, we have to invest now in education, because when we produce the last barrel of oil in 2050, we need to be happy about it. And that shows they are expecting the fossil age to end, and they are want to take as much of the triangle of revenue they get and invest in future energy and future human ingenuity. So I think the answers will come out from east of here. And actually, with the debates that are going on in the US at the moment, it ain't going to come from west of here in the next 5 to 10 years. Having said that, if you look at where the money in Silicon Valley is going, you look at where people like Bill Gates and and some of those people who made lots of money out of the tech tipping point, they are looking at the energy tipping point. There's lots of money. I mentioned small modular reactors. A lot of that money is coming out of the tech industry being funded. So I'm now arguing against myself.
Sorry, I was Maggie was a low carbon economy team, brand new title, leader at Durham County Council. And I apologise because I was halfway to ask the same question anyway, but when we were talking about new buildings, I thought people would be quite interested to know that County Council will have 800 buildings, and of those, the most energy efficient one, for those of you that know the area, is County Hall, which is a 1960s block with big single glazed glass windows. We've got 2 brand new, brand outstanding buildings. I don't say where they are, and they're our worst performers. So I think there's a whole issue around what we do with technology, and there's perhaps more true with big buildings than the small ones. The question I was going to ask was about what we think about the rest of the world. Where you see Africa, for example, leapfrogging, not bothering with landline development, they're straight to mobiles. Could the same happen?
I mean, if you go to Africa, the first thing that strikes you is how ubiquitous mobile phones are, and what you realise is that technology completely leapt over. They never had fixed line. To people in Africa and to the younger, a mobile phone is a phone. There's no comprehension of anything else. So solar, particularly solar, is leapfrogging in Africa, and there are 4 or 5 in major fund initiatives that I'm aware of looking at investing in African solar. I'm involved in a charity called Solar Aid that does it in the small rural communities. And if you meet people from Africa who've had their first solar light, it transforms their life because it's safer, cleaner, brighter, cheaper. Yeah. So again, I think that the energy revolution that will happen, I talked about tipping point and what the energy world here will look like. Africa will go straight to it. It will be decentralized, it will be silicon, and it will be clean. That's certainly the case in Africa. I'm not aware. That's the part I keep an eye on. I suspect similar trends are happening elsewhere. I'm on the board of Aggreko, who are the world's largest provider of temporary power, and their business model for the last 50 years has been diesel and gas. More and more of their clients are saying, can we have solar integrated with that, please? So they are having to work out, how can you do temporary solar? Can you do so it's because of the scale of things. But it's interesting that the push is coming from all around the world. How can we clean up our footprint? So I'm internationally optimistic as well, even if I'm domestically pessimistic. Gentlemen, and then we'll go.
So we're from the University of Germany. First of all, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. But then you took the view of the Secretary of Energy. Given the first view you have of the digitalization and smartphones and so on, I would expect not a politician but an entrepreneur. Because the question you have raised, is it really, is it about policy or is it about innovation? And policy is probably not the best innovative environment we usually get. Because if you take, the iPhones and so on, that was not regulation, that was not policy progress, it was just customer needs and brilliant people. So is it really the answer of all the challenges you raised, is it really politics or is it entrepreneurship and innovation?
The answer is both. And if you take the example you used of mobile phones, you had to get the policy right. You had to make the spectrum available. So policymakers have an influence. There's a great quote from Thomas Paine, who was the intellectual founding father of the American Revolution. And he said the role of governments is to lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Yes.
And the problem is at the moment governments are getting in the way. And they need to, I think, in some areas lead, but largely lead, then follow, then get out of the way. And it's unlocking the power of the innovation. Markets are ruthless. Innovation is ruthless. Politicians can block it. And so you need both. You need both. And they need to work together. At the moment they're fighting against each other. Gentlemen.
Yes, thanks very much, Gavin Bridge. I'm a geographer who works on issues of energy and resource supply. This follows on from the question about policy and innovation. But I'm thinking about another area of dynamic change, and that's in the organisation of our energy system. And what struck me from your presentation is the kind of trends that you identify from big to small, from centralised to decentralised, from carbon to silicon, and the elevation of demand management. And the question in my mind is how fit for purpose is our Big Six for delivering on those trends, particularly their ability to deliver demand side change.
I struggle with that, having led one of them. I recognise the strengths that the economies of scale that large companies can have, but the difficulty of innovating, particularly disruptive innovation. And most of the stuff on the demand side is disruptive. And you're classically thinking there of, are the Big Six, the Kodak of this industry. Now, for those of you who don't remember, Kodak had 96% of the film market in little canisters. Ignored digital photography because, quote, it wasn't as good as film, which at that time was true. 30 years later, Kodak is bust because it just did not follow the disruptive innovation of digital film. There are other examples. Blockbuster and Netflix is another good one. So part of the problem with the Big Six is how do they address disruptive innovation? What I can tell you is that I am aware of at least 5 of the Big Six who are trying to work out how they can play in the home automation space. Probably all 6, I'm just aware of 5. So they are struggling with that. They realise that their role as a mass purveyor of a commodity hasn't gone down well. People don't trust the energy companies, and they are all looking to varying degrees. Law of averages says some of them are not going to survive this, but some will. Who? I don't know. Some of them will get lucky, and some will be unlucky. But I do think, and you've seen a lot more emergence of smaller companies in the energy supply space. So the Big Six are certainly less big than they were. And you've also seen different ownership structures. You've got mutualising companies, local authorities that are looking at buying on behalf of their citizens of people who live in their town. I can say that. I think we will see a model, because the energy industry was strange in that 6 companies had something like 99% of the market. Whereas in supermarkets there are 4 big ones, but they only had about 60%. You had an enormous fringe of lots of different ideas, from a stall to a quite a large local shop. Energy didn't have that, and that's what we're starting to see. And I think you will see a whole different spread of ownerships and styles. What we don't have in the energy industry is a big mutual, which most industries do have. Waitrose, John Lewis in retail, Nationwide in mortgage provision, for instance, the co-op in retail as well. We don't have that in energy, and I wonder how that whether that's a gap that needs to be plugged. Some thoughts. Maybe this is the last question, gentlemen. Just
Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm a management consultant who works in the energy sector. And I was just wondering where you saw smart in your view of the energy future in terms of smart metering, and whether you think that's a good policy to put in now or it's too complex for this current state.
10 years ago, 10 years ago, I had a meeting with Charles Hendry, who at that point was the shadow Minister of State for Energy. And he said to Ian, I'm going to win the elections. This is pre the 2010 election. What do you think is the single most important policy that we should be pursuing? And at that point I said smart metering. I now regret that answer, in the sense that what I should have foreseen is that we couldn't have done it quickly and sensibly. Now, it's going to be a millstone around our neck, because actually to control my home heating, I don't need a smart meter. And actually, I could easily have a little algorithm on my phone that would be 99% accurate about the economic cost of the actions I'm doing. I don't actually need the meter. So I fear we have wasted time and money, and we're installing 20th century technology, because Moore's law has carried on. So we've had 5 cycles of Moore's law since we decided to do smart metering. So smart energy that you control, absolutely. I don't think smart meters will do that. Have any of you got a smart meter installed in your house yet? Okay, because they are starting to come. Believe me, it won't change your life. But having the ability to control your heating on your phone does start to change what you do. So we need to be smart, but not smart metering.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we can tell by the fact we're 10 minutes over time there on questions anyway, that we've all found that very interesting. It's great to have you here yet again supporting us. I think it just remains for us to thank you in the usual way.